Flood detection and mapping. The monsoonal flood pulse is the primary mechanism affecting productivity in the Tonle Sap Lake, wetlands and floodplain. The economically important fisheries of the Tonle Sap are strongly influenced by the maximum flooded area and resultant area of fish feeding and breeding habitat, Webby et al. 2005. Remote sensing of the inundation patterns across the study area therefore formed an important part of the current study. Knowledge of the extent and residence time of floodwaters on the floodplains of major rivers is essential for hydrological and biological studies of these systems, and yet for most areas of the Mekong, this remains largely unknown beyond simple maps of flood extent. For the Tonle Sap, the ADB has compiled maps showing minimum and maximum flood extents for the catchments around the lake as derived from satellite image interpretation, ADB, 2009. For the areas examined in this study, information on flow rates and stream heights may be available, but because of the low relief and complex hydrology of many wetland areas, these data do not correlate well with inundation patterns. Rates of organic matter production, decomposition and export to the river channel are closely linked to floodplain inundation patterns. Primary production rates in inland wetlands are very high and these communities may cover hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, Matthews and Fung, 1987. In many large river systems with associated extensive wetland areas, the difficulty in determining the extent of flooding makes it difficult to accurately estimate wetland area and characterize vegetation relationships. Ground measurement of flooding in forested wetlands is severely limited by the inaccessibility typical of these areas, where mobility is often hampered by flooding and boggy conditions. Remote sensing offers the ability to detect flooded over such areas, and this is typically done using optical or radar imagery. With regard to optical remote sensing of inundation and the spectral reflectance of water, probably the most distinctive characteristic is the absorption of energy at near-infrared, NIR, wavelength. Locating and delineating water bodies with remote sensing data is done most easily at near wavelengths because of this property, Lelisand et al. 2008. However, various conditions of water bodies manifest themselves primarily in visible wavelength. Landsat-TM imagery has been used to map floodwater distribution and characteristics, e.g. Imhoff et al. 1987, Pope et al. 1992, Mertz et al. 1993, 1995, Johnston and Barson 1993, and optical spot data has also been used for floodwater mapping, Blasco et al. 1992. Remote sensing of flooding may also be hampered by forest canopies that render the land/water boundary invisible to infrared and visible wavelength sensors and by frequent cloud cover during periods of rainfall. These limitations are largely overcome by SAR radar sensors which are unaffected by clouds and can significantly penetrate relatively dense forest canopies, Hess et al. 1990. Passive microwave remote sensing has also proved useful for revealing large-scale inundation patterns, even in the presence of cloud cover and dense vegetation, Chowdhury 1991, Sippel et al. 1994. The bright appearance of flooded forests on radar images results from double bounce reflections between smooth water surfaces and tree trunks or branches. Enhanced backscattering at L-band has been shown to occur in a wide variety of forest types and is a function of both stand density and branching structure, Hess et al. 1990. Steep incidence angles, 2030-0, are optimal for detection of flooding, since some forests exhibit bright returns only at steeper angles. Backscattering from flooded forests is enhanced by underlying water. For forests of moderate density, L-band returns are dominated by corner reflections between trunks and surface and between branches and surface, Richards et al. 1987a. Scattering from a smooth water surface is specular, whereas that from soil includes a significant diffuse component and therefore the amplitude of returns will be higher for standing water beneath forests. There is a high degree of structural diversity associated with flooded forests, as they occur on numerous substrates, in both saline and fresh water and at a wide range of latitudes, Matthews and Fung 1987. Most frequently studied have been the swamp forests of the coastal plains of the southeastern United States. Relatively bright L-band returns from semi-permanently to permanently flooded stands have been reported in several studies, for example Hoffer et al. 1986, Evans et al. 1986, Woon-Sater 1987, Detection of underlying water in mangrove swamps was demonstrated by M. Hoff et al. 1987, in the Sundarbans region of Bangladesh, and by Ford and Casey, 1988, in East Kalimantan. Bright returns for seasonally inundated temperate forests are described by Richards et al. 1987b, for Eucalyptus commelgulensis forests in Australia. Ford et al. 1986, distinguished flooded Varzea forest from non-flooded forest using survey scenes of the Rio Japara in the Amazon basin. The forest stands cited above have very diverse structures, canopy depth relative to total tree height, dominant branching angle, and crown shape are quite variable. They also encompass a wide range of leaf type and tree heights. It is clear that stands with low stem densities may appear bright at L band, Hess et al. 1990. Enhancement has also been shown for stands described as dense or thick, Hoffer et al. 1986, Ford and Casey 1988. Enhanced backscattering from flooded forests thus occurs over a broad range of tree species, canopy structures and stand densities. Richards et al. 1987b, demonstrated that brighter returns from flooded forests are not simply a function of vegetation differences between upland and lowland sites. They were able to clearly distinguish between flooded and non-flooded portions of a single forest type. The accuracy of flood detection using radar imagery is difficult to determine since most studies of flooded forests focus only on those areas which do yield bright L-band returns. Near or complete absence of backscatter from flooded Maryland swamps with dense canopies has been noted by Crone et al. 1983. It appears that dense undergrowth may significantly affect double bounce returns. Ford and Casey, 1988, found the opposite to be true, however, in flooded mangrove forests of Kalimantan. They found that open stands of low slender trees did not yield bright returns on survey imagery while adjacent denser mangrove stands did. The above example suggests that for certain forest types, the extent of flooding beneath the canopy would be underestimated using L-band radar. Overestimation would occur if other targets yielding bright returns were mistaken for flooded forests. Other sources of bright returns would normally be able to be visually distinguished from flooded forest based on shape, pattern, associated features and minimal site knowledge. A more serious source of confusion is non-forest vegetation naturally occurring adjacent to flooded forest. Flooded marshes, emergent herbaceous vegetation, typically appear dark at L-band, Crone et al. 1983, Ormsby et al. 1985. However, marsh vegetation sometimes yields bright returns very similar to those from flooded forests, Crone et al. 1983. The magnitude of enhancement associated with double bounce beneath flooded forests can vary significantly. In many studies, variations in magnitude appear to be the result of differences in stand composition as well as flooding, Hess et al. 1990. The problem of separating backscatter variation caused by differences in vegetation from that caused by flooding was minimized in the study by Richards et al. 1987b, because of the virtually monospecific stands of eucalyptus examined. Backscattering from flooded and non-flooded sites within the forest was estimated to vary by 10.8 decibels, a substantial difference. Treating the canopy as a uniform layer of small particles, Ingeda and Ecology, 1982, estimate the enhancement resulting from the presence of a perfectly reflecting surface beneath the canopy to be 3 to 6 decibels. It appears from the literature that L-band radar imagery used in the current study should enable accurate delineation of floodwater boundaries. Aims of this study in relation to flood detection and mapping were to utilize remote sensing methods to a. Characterize the flood cycles of the lake, b. Map the spatial distribution of water across the floodplain, and c. Determine the relationship between the flooding cycles of the lake and vegetation distributions across the floodplain. The current flood monitoring and mapping efforts of the MNRC and MRC rely on simple linear models of the relationship between river gauge height collected at only a few locations and maximum annual volume and flooded area. Few of the tributaries which drain the 13 catchments around the lake and make significant contributions to lake volume and flooded area have any gauging stations, and hydrological relationships between these tributaries and the lake are complex. Penny, 2006. For the current study, regional scale MODIS, moderate resolution imaging spectrometer, data was used to determine inundation patterns. MODIS images in 36 spectral bands at 250 meters, 500 meters and 1 kilometer resolutions, dependent on wavelength, and is widely used for multiple land and ocean applications which require high-frequency temporal coverage, Lilasand et al.